What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Tarkir Dragonstorm State of the Format Address episode. This is going to be a breakdown of what's going on in this format, how I think you want to approach your drafts, how to think about the decks in the format. I want to highlight some underrated cards, and just in general, I want to give you some tips and tricks to best set you up for success going forward. There's so much to talk about in this format. It's a really complex one. Let's just jump in. We're going to start somewhere that I don't usually start for these episodes, and that's draft navigation. Usually, I save thoughts on draft navigation for after I cover the decks and the individual cards, sort of a here are the ingredients first, and then here's how to put them all together second approach to it. But I think walking through how to navigate the drafts lets me cover some guidelines on how to approach drafting 3-color formats. I know that's something that's been a bit of a headache for a lot of drafters who haven't drafted a 3-color format before. And I think it's just the best place to start for laying out the groundwork for the rest of the episode. If you can get a handle on draft navigation for this format, piecing together the decks and understanding where all the cards go, I think it becomes a lot easier. So in any format, 2-color format, 3-color format, doesn't matter. Draft navigation to me is the puzzle of figuring out the right balance of power versus flexibility in each pick. You want to draft in a way where you're taking powerful cards as often as you can. It's great to have a bunch of powerful cards, but you also want to make sure that your picks are flexible. You don't necessarily want to lock into your colors right away, because then that might cut you off of powerful cards of other colors. And you also don't want to just take the most powerful card every single time out of each pack, because, then you end up with a non-functional multicolor mess. And if you've watched my content talking about this kind of stuff before, talking about draft navigation, or you've watched me draft a lot, you'll notice that the way that I approach this puzzle of power versus flexibility is often like, pick one, pack one, you take the strongest card in the pack, whatever that is. And then when you get to pick two, you identify A, what the strongest card in the pack is, regardless of if it goes with your first pick. And then B, you want to identify what the strongest card in the pack is that does go with your first pick. And generally that means a card of the same color. And if those are the same thing, great. If you first picked a green card, then you get to pick two, and the best card in the pack is a green card, awesome, right? That's the best thing, best case scenario. But if the best card in the pack isn't of the same color as your first pick, then you have to weigh, okay, well, is that card enough better for me to take a card that doesn't go with my first pick? And this is a bit of a simplification of the process. Of course, there are other factors, but if you roughly follow this pattern every single pick, you naturally end up with a strong deck because you're never really taking a bad card, and you're also building out a solid core of one color so that you don't end up in a non-functional deck. That's how I tend to solve the puzzle of flexibility versus power. It's also a very natural way of reading signals. Often I hear people say, I've had a hard time reading signals in this draft. And when I hear that, I kind of, and maybe this is, wrong perception on my part, but I kind of think they're thinking of it like, okay, I have to meticulously read every single pack and how many red cards are here and how many white cards and what did I get past 2 packs ago? I really don't think it's as complicated as that. I really think you can just boil it down to, well, keep taking strong cards and you'll naturally fall into the open colors. And to give you an example of what this looks like in a 2-color format, I'm going to use Aether Drift as an example because it's the most recent format we've had. That's a 2-color format. Let's just say you first pick Lumbering World Wagon. Awesome green rare. One of the best green rares in the set. You get to the next pick, and the best card in the pack, also a green card. Tarian World Tyrant. Awesome. You feel pretty good about that. Then you get to the next pick, and you're faced with Spin Out, a black removal spell, and Hazard of the Dunes, a pretty good green threat. So, I could see this going either way. I would personally take the Hazard of the Dunes because I think it's close enough to spin out, even though it's worse. It's close enough to spin out that I'm happy to be flexible here, pick up more green cards, disincentivize other people from moving to green, obviously, but more importantly, building out your green core so you can say, okay, no matter what the most open color is at the table, let's just say it's not even green. I can scoop up that most open color, play it with my green cards, because I'm just building out this green core, and I say, oh, okay, pick 5. There's a lot of good blue cards here. Pick 6, same thing happened. I can just say, okay, maybe green's not even the most open color, but I've got all these awesome green cards, and now I move into the most open color, which is blue. You pair your early picks with your open color, and there you go. You found your color pair. Again, a bit of an oversimplification, but just for the example here. And quickly, just to give you the inverse example, let's just say that green card in the pack isn't Hazard of the Dunes pick 3, it's Venom Sac Lagak, the 2-mana 2/1 Death Touch in green. Well, I think the delta between Venom Sac Lagak and Spin Out is much too large to take the Lagak here, right? So I'm willing to give up some flexibility for some power, and it's always that push and pull. Every single pick of the draft before you've locked into your color pair is that push and pull between flexibility and power. But when you're drafting a 3-color format like Tarkir, you have to change your approach a little bit, because you can't just get deep into one color generally and then add colors from there. I mean, there are some drafts that happen, but most drafts, if you try to just get deep into one color, The issue is that, one, there's not as many monocolored cards running around, right? There's actually just like a ton of gold cards filling the pack, so you won't have as many good options each pick. But two, if you're not saying, okay, well, I'm not going to take gold cards early, like you might in some other set, then you give up a ton of power. If you're waiting to say, like, okay, I want to figure out what the open clan is, and then I'll take the gold cards, well, you're going to end up with less powerful decks early on. But then, the opposite, right? If you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take gold cards early on, I want to take those powerful cards, that leaves you with a bit of a flexibility problem. Because let's say you open up a good 3-color card, Tevel, the Sultai Mythic Dragon, for example. 6/6 lifelink flyer, give your spells delve, awesome card. You take that card because it's great and it's awesome, but do you then put the blinders on and say, okay, I'm Sultai now, blinders on, I'm just going to take the best blue, green, and black cards I see? I would say no, because that cuts you off of the possibility of seeing powerful cards of another clan later. So maybe you get past some good Temur rares, and there's a lot of good Temur rares in this set, by the way, a lot of really busted Temur rares. If you don't keep a flexible mindset about what colors you're in, you're just like, okay, I'm just going to be Sultai, blinders on, then your decks are going to be less powerful on average than they could be. And so the solve for all of this is, instead of trying to get deep into one color to remain flexible like you would in a 2-color format, my goal early on in most Tarkir drafts is try to get deep into an enemy color pair, so into 2 colors. And those enemy color pairs, for those who are not familiar with that terminology, are blue-green, black-green, blue-red, white-red, and black-white. If you are unclear of those, just look at the back of a Magic card. It's the 2 colors that don't touch, right? Like blue-white, for example, they touch, but black-white, they don't touch on the back of a Magic card. Those you can kind of treat as your monocolored bases, right? Like, almost think of, okay, well, there's 5 colors of Magic. That's what I think of in a 2-color set. There's 5 2-color pairs those are your bases. Those are your bases you're trying to get into, so you can be flexible while still taking those powerful gold cards early. If, for example, you first pick a Kishla Skimmer, which is the blue-green 2/2 flyer, that draws you a card if a card leaves your graveyard. By the way, I don't mind first picking these powerful 2-color cards. They're roughly about as flexible as a monocolored card would be in another set. If you take Kishla Skimmer, that opens you up to adding black to your deck for a Sultai deck, or Sultai cards, or red to your deck for Temur cards. And something that I've been doing a lot, and you can do too if you start in a base of 2 colors, is not just saying, okay, I'm going to start in a base of 2 colors, then find my clan later, right? Figure out whatever 3-color combination I'm playing later. You can just play 2 colors, like be base blue-green, so all of your early cards are blue-green, and then you take the powerful 3-color cards from Sultai and from Temur. If you're only splashing like 2 or 3 cards of both those colors, like 2 black cards and 2 red cards, then you get a lot of power in your deck while rotating some flexibility. So my goal is to find a 2-color base, but what does that actually look like? Well, it's going to look a little bit different depending on how many colors your first pick or your early picks are. If you start your draft with a strong monocolored card, you're going to want to think about navigating through the draft a bit differently than if you were to start with a 2-color card, and you're also going to want to think about things a little bit differently if you do start with a 3-color card. So let's walk through those 3 situations and how you want to think about them, because I think roughly you start your draft with a monocolored, a 2-colored, and a 3-color card about at the same rate. You know, not exactly the same, but roughly at the same rate as each other. So let's say you first pick Meringue River Regent, one of the best cards in the set. This is the 4 blue 6/7 flying dragon. It says when it enters, return up to 2 non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Also has the omen to 4 mana, draw some cards. Just, really great card. It's great to start with a monocolored card even in this set. Is the ultimate flexibility. Where do you go from there? Well, you can take a blue card, just a mono blue card. For example, Roiling Dragonstorm. This is the 1 in a blue enchantment that enters, you draw 2, discard a card, then when you cast a dragon, you can pick this thing up. That card's pretty strong, nothing wrong with that. You could also take a red card, something like Sunset Strike Master, the 2 mana 3/1 that taps to add a red mana, and you can pay 3 to sack it to deal 6 damage to something with flying, because that lands you in an enemy color pair, right? That lands you in blue-red. Or you could take Kishla Skimmer. You could just take a straight up blue-green gold card. Maybe you get past a good Sultai rare, like Lotus Light Dancers, which is the 5 mana Sultai card. It's a 3/6 lifelink that when it enters, you put 3 cards in your graveyard, a blue card, a black card, and a green card. And you go, okay, well, I'm seeing all these cards. What do I take here? Well, this is where you still can employ that strategy I was talking about at the beginning, like you would in a 2-color format of just going, all right, well, I'm weighing power versus flexibility here. What's the most powerful card here? Probably the Sultai card. What's the most flexible card here? Well, the blue card, of course, because that just leaves you super duper open. So that probably rules out the Strike Master. I don't want to take a red card when and there's a good monocolor blue card in the pack. It probably rules out the Kishless Skimmer too, because I think Roiling Dragonstorm and Kishless Skimmer are about equal. You know, you can maybe make the argument that Skimmer is slightly more powerful, but again, you know, want to stay flexible. So really it's between Roiling Dragonstorm and Lotus Light Dancers here, and yeah, that's a pretty close pick for me. It kind of depends on what you want to go for. One of them gives you a bit more power, one of them gives you a bit more flexibility, but you're still just weighing things the same way, like you would in any other set. An example of what you don't want to do though, something that's inflexible, is you've got a first pick awesome blue card, and you see a pack with Teeming Dragonstorm. It's the 3 and a white enchantment that comes in, makes 2/2 tokens, and then when a dragon you control enters, you get to pick it up. Or Disruptive Stormbrood, which is the 5 mana green 3/3 flying dragon, comes in, destroys a enchantment or artifact, also has a black omen, 2 mana omen, destroy target creature with power 3 or less. Well, in a normal draft set, the flexible pick here, which would be to take the monocolored card, right? The card that doesn't need 2 colors. I mean, you don't need 2 colors for the Stormbrood, but you would like 2 colors for it. But of course, in this set, if you take a white card after a blue card, that puts you in an allied color pair, right? That puts you in blue and white. You don't want to be there because that's inflexible, because you won't get any blue, white, gold cards because there are none in this set, and you can only take Jeskai cards, right? Because if you're a blue-white base, the only 3 color cards you can play without adding more colors to your deck are the Jeskai cards. Whereas if you take the Stormbrood, you can be a blue-green base, maybe move into Sultai, maybe move into Temur and splash the black side. It's just a lot more flexible. Yeah, just keep that in mind. I was streaming this week, and somebody in my chat was like, oh man, like I've been having a really tough time in this format. I feel like my decks aren't very good. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, what did your deck look like? Like, what did your last draft look like? And they were like, well, I ended up green-white. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty big problem. That's a pretty big red flag of like, okay, you're probably navigating the draft in a weird way, in a way that doesn't really make sense, because you're just not going to be able to pick up powerful cards. I imagine the average green-white deck in this format is very underpowered. However, Magic, being the complex beast that it is, it doesn't mean you're never going to take a white card after you take a blue card. So same example here, we have that Meringue River region in our pile, and we get past the pack where the 2 best cards are Sage of the Skies, which is the 2 and a white 2/3 flying lifelink that says when you cast this spell, if you cast another spell this turn, copy this spell. Excellent card, fantastic, one of the best rares in the set. And again, that Disruptive Stormbrood, the black-green Omen Dragon. Well, I think that Sage is much better than the Disruptive Stormbrood, and I like Stormbrood. So I go, well, you know, I probably take the Sage of the Skies, and maybe I end up Jeskai, maybe I am narrowing in, or maybe I end up Temur with some white sources in my deck somehow. Like, as much as this getting into an enemy color pair base is something I would stress in a good guideline, it's not a hard and fast rule. There's going to be exceptions. You still want to be taking powerful cards. So once again, I'm just going to say, always a balance of power versus flexibility. The second situation that you might find yourself in, the one we already talked about a few minutes ago, is you first pick a 2-color card. So we're going to take Kishless Skimmer again as an example. From that point, you want to be taking good monocolored blue cards, good monocolored green cards, speculate on Sultai cards and Temur cards, though, you know, the 3-color cards in the adjacent clans to blue-green. But sometimes when you take a 2-color card, just like in any other format, your colors just aren't open, right? So I first pick Kishless Skimmer. I maybe take a good monocolored blue common the next pick, the Sibsig Apprentice, the 3 mana 2/1 in blue, that you look at the top 2 cards of your library, take one, put in your hand, the other in the grave. And then you get to pack 3. Okay, nothing great in blue and green. Maybe you take kind of like a middling card. And then you get to pick 4. And you see a Sonic Shrieker, which is the 2 red, white, black, 4/4 flying dragon. When it enters, it deals 2 to any target and you gain 2 life. And if you target your opponent with this, they discard a card. Fantastic card. One of the best uncommons in the set. I don't mind jumping ship. I've heard people say it's kind of hard to pivot in this set, and it is to some degree because the draft paths are a little bit narrow. But just like in any other set, if you get to the middle of pack 1 and your colors just aren't open, don't be afraid to do a full 180, especially for a really powerful card. And then the final situation where you do first pick a 3-color card. Well, when you first pick a 3-color card, we're going to use Tevel again as the example, the Sultai Dragon. I still want to try to find a 2-color base. I'm not locking myself into Sultai right now, so I'm thinking, okay, I want to either get into blue-green or black-green, and you know, it's kind of spoiler alert, I would prefer to be in blue-green than black-green. I think that's the much stronger 2-color base in this set. So I go, okay, well, you know, I'm just going to try to take good monocolored blue cards, good monocolored green cards. I'm fine taking a Kishless Skimmer next pack. So basically, you're just going to want to narrow into one of the 2-color pairs that this 3-color pair encompasses and go from there, right? So I could easily see myself first picking Tevel, moving into blue-green, And actually, Temur was actually pretty open, and I got past some Temur rares. So my base deck is a Temur deck, but I have some black sources in my deck, Splash and Tevil still. So I'll still get to play my awesome card. I get to be blue-green base. I get to be blue-green base, splashing maybe 3 red cards, 3 really good gold-red cards. But then Tevil, my first pick, my awesome first pick, I still get to play that because my mana is clean. My early cards are all focused in blue-green, and my mana doesn't give me any problems, right? I'm not just like straight across the board 4 colors or anything. And that's another big thing too. We're going to transition in a second to talking about Manabases. But you really want to make sure that your early spells are of 2 colors, so you don't run into awkwardness of just like just like in any of the other format when you're splashing. I have all the wrong lands and all the wrong colors. Having that consistency early in the game still matters a lot, even in a set like this with a lot of fixing. So that's going to cap off our section for draft navigation. I was going to maybe go through an example, walk through 6-7 picks of a pack, but for the sake of time, because we do have a lot to cover today, I'm just going to link one of my recent draft logs in the description, both in the podcast feed and the YouTube video. So go check that out if you just want an idea of what this looks like in action. And a quick pit stop to Patreon plug land. If you're enjoying the podcast, go check out the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. That's where you can go to support me, any of my content. If you feel like the podcast has helped you enjoy Magic a little bit more, win a few more drafts, do consider checking it out. There's a bunch of rewards over there. If you choose to give it to us, we give back to you. And if you want to support the podcast in a non-monetary way, a like, a comment, subscribe, if you're watching on YouTube, does go a very long way. So thank you so much to everybody supporting. Let's get back to the show. All right, next up, we have to talk about, in this 3-color format, Manabases. If you're somebody who's not super confident in your ability to build and draft Manabases, I would highly, highly recommend going to check out one of my previous videos / podcasts. It's from like a month ago. It's a mana base level up, and I go really in depth just talking about what a good limited mana base looks like, how many sources you need for splashes, all that kind of stuff. It covers what I can't really cover in this episode. Again, we just don't have enough time to really go deep on mana bases, but that would be my kind of first point of contact. If you feel like you're struggling building and drafting mana bases, if you feel like your spells are not castable in this format as much as you'd like them to be. That being said, there are some Tarkir specific things I want to talk about regarding mana bases, and I'm also going to reiterate some things from that video if you don't have time to go watch a 50-minute long video about mana bases. So things that are really pertinent to this format that I think are important. So let's start with an example of a deck that I think does not have a particularly good mana base and some things that I think you want to avoid. So for those listening audio only, it's going to be a little bit rough here, but I'll try to describe best what's happening here. We've got a Jeskai deck in front of us that's got a lot of really powerful cards. We've got that Meringue River Regent, that big blue dragon, Shiko, Paragon of the Way, the mythic Jeskai dragon. We've got some good rares in here, Anafenza, White's rare, Sage of the Skies, that lifelink flyer that copies itself. But I think this deck has some pretty substantial mana issues. Number one, if you're just looking at the lands, the mana base here, we are almost exactly split across plains, islands, mountains. We do have one Mystic Monastery, the Tri-land, but this kind of mana base just invites the kind of situation where you draw all your islands and your plains, and you don't have red, right? Or all your mountains and your islands, and you don't have white, and you can't cast your white cards on time. Basically, this is just not enough sources for having a spell base, which the spell base here is extremely split down the middle between red, white, and blue. Now, if you handed this pile of cards to me after the draft was done, I'd say, yeah, basically this is what we have to work with. There's not really anything I can do to fix this pile. But building a good mana base starts in the draft, and not just in drafting dual lands and tri-lands and making sure, that you have, appropriate number of sources in your deck, but making sure you're not evenly split on all 3 colors. Because like I mentioned a few minutes ago, ideally the way your deck looks is it's base 2 colors, and one of the advantages of being base 2 colors is that your early cards are castable consistently, right? If your 2-drop slot, like this deck here, is 2 white cards, 2 red cards, 2 blue cards, it's kind of a bit of a crapshoot for, do I have my early colors? You're gonna have to mulligan a lot in this deck. And one of the kind of insidious things about having a mana base like this is even if you have an opening hand with Plains, Island, Mountain, you won't be able to double spell in a way that you would be able to if your deck was a little bit cleaner on the mana. So, we're going to get into talking about lands in a few minutes, but one thing I really, really want to stress, aside from lands, aside from sources, and we're going to get into source counts, all that kind of stuff, your early cards should very much be focused in 2 colors. I'm not saying literally all of them have to be, But for your 2-drops that you're planning to play on turn 2, you want them to be focused in 2 colors. If you have removal spells, like 2-mana removal spells, that's fine, because your removal spells, you would like to be able to cast them on turn 2 sometimes, but you're also fine casting them on turn 4 or 5, right? That's a little more acceptable. I've been doing pretty well in this format so far. I'm like hovering somewhere around like 68% win rate, but I think that win rate is inflated because a lot of my wins so far have been against opponents with bad mana, like opponents who clearly have just a bunch of cards stuck in hand that they can't cast. If you're drafting, like I suggested, you can avoid this problem very easily. And if your decks do look like this right now, and you're thinking, okay, I'm not winning in this format as much as I would like to, that's probably why. That's probably a big reason why. Ideally, your decks look more like the one I have in front of me here. I've got an Obzon deck that's base black-white. All of its 2-drops are just black and white. In the mana base, I've got a Tri-land, Sandstep Citadel. I've got a Blossoming Sands. I've got a Jungle Hollow. I've got 2 Scoured Barrens, which admittedly now we're getting to a few too many tap lands for my taste, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And 2 Forests, and I'm splashing only 2 cards. A Revival of the Ancestors, which is the Obzon Saga, and a Skirmish Rhino, the 3/4 trample that drains your opponent for 2 when it comes in. And a question I've gotten a lot over the last week is how many sources do I need for my 3rd color? And this is something I go over in the mana base video at length, but I'll talk about it here too. Splashing a 3rd color in this format, you don't even necessarily think of it as splashing because you're like, oh, it's a 3-color format, I'm playing 3 colors, but you're still effectively splashing a 3rd and or 4th color in a lot of your decks. This format has the same splashing rules as any other format. So what that means is if you have one card you're looking to splash, you need 3 or 4 sources. A dual land and a devotee and a tri-land at bare minimum. 3 sources is a minimum for your splash card. Ideally, I think you're looking at 4 sources. If you've got 2 cards, then you need 4 or 5 sources. If you've got 3 cards, you need 5 or 6 cards. If you're anywhere past that, then you're kind of more of a 3-color deck where your mana base needs to look something like 8 sources of your 2 main colors plus like 7 sources of your splash color. That means you probably have 5 dual lands, some devotees, some of the monuments, some other fixing in there. You really have to have a lot of fixing to be anything past 3 or 4 cards on the splash. Another thing that I talk about in that mana base video is that if you're playing at lower ranks, like gold, silver, bronze, like anything below platinum basically, and even this creeps in a little bit to the platinum rank, I would say, I do think on average your mana base can be a little bit worse, because your average opponent will also have a worse mana base and will be pressuring you a little bit less than a strong player would be. And this isn't to say that I think you should try to build a sketchier mana base. It's just to say that if you're used to playing in those lower ranks and you're hearing me talk about these rules for mana bases, you might be like, well, my cards are perfectly castable. Like, I haven't had a problem with my decks. It's going to feel a little bit more like that in those lower ranks where you have more time. Your opponents might stumble a little bit more. And the problem is that as you do get better and as you rise in the ranks, or just, if you're a paper-only player, you're facing good players the more you play, the intuition that you've built on playing in lower ranks will kind of lead you astray. Right, so I get it. If you're listening to all these mana-based rules and you're like, that's odd, like that I haven't been too affected by this, that could be part of it. So let's talk about all the various fixers in this set, because there are a lot of ways to fix your mana in this set. Really an overflowing number of ways, which means that I've been playing 4 colors more than 3 colors a lot of the time, sometimes 5 colors. But yeah, let's just jump in. So one of the better fixers you can pick up in the format are the tri-lands. So something like Opulent Palace, enters tapped, adds black, green, blue. Not only for the decks that have all 3 colors, these are going to be very good, but even as early picks in the draft, they're decent because they're pretty flexible. We also have the tapped dual lands that gain a life when they enter, and Evolving Wilds. And one thing I've been asked a lot this week is, how high do you take all of these lands? I generally don't take the non-tri lands, so like the tapped duals and Evolving Wilds, very highly in pack 1. I think it's better to just take strong spells and then fix your mana later. There's a lot of fixing in this set. If this was a set with not as much fixing, you might have to lock it in early and speculate on early. But since there's so much of it, I tend not to spend early picks on these lands. I'll take them when there's nothing else in the pack I really want. I'll even speculate on them when they're not touching any of my spells colors just yet. But I'd much rather lock in strong spells first and then take fixing later, especially because in the case of Evolving Wilds and these dual lands, I think there are fixers that are much more flexible, fix you for more colors of mana, don't lock you into certain colors of mana. And Evolving Wilds in particular, actually, I'm sort of down on in this set. Just because it does lock you into one color. It's not bad. I'm not trying to say don't draft Evolving Wilds, but I was looking at where these lands are being taken on 17lands.com, just on average, and people are like 3rd, 4th, 5th picking Evolving Wilds sometimes. I think that's probably a little too high. I can imagine a pack where that might happen, but I haven't come across one just yet. There's often a good spell in the pack, either in your colors or to speculate on. The tri-lands I do prioritize highly. Like I can't give you a pick number I take it at because it really depends on what else is in the pack. But I take the tri-lands about on par with good commons. Let me put it that way. We also have the Devotee cycle, which are the creatures that filter mana. And I kind of treat these like dual lands as well. I think actually a little bit better than dual lands because they are tempo positive ways to fix your mana. One of the things, another reason I don't like taking a bunch of lands early is because if you end up taking a bunch of lands early, you'll end up with like 6, 7 tap lands sometimes, and you don't want that many tap lands. I think that's another mana-based mistake that happens a lot in this format, is that people just, they say, okay, well, it's a multicolor format, I'm just going to play all the tap lands in the world. I much prefer my fixing in the set to be spell-based, because there's actually a lot of really good spell-based fixing. We've got the Devotees, we've got a few other cards I'm about to talk about in a minute, but there's a limit. There's definitely an upper limit to the number of tap lands you have in your deck. Now, sometimes you just need the fixing. Like, I'm not saying skimp on the sources. If you need the fixing, you need the fixing. But the way I draft, staying at 2-color base, that means I'm kind of allowing myself not to have to play infinite tap lands. Because once you get past 3 tap lands, that generally will hurt your curve out at some point. And this isn't a format where if you don't play a 2-drop on 2, you just die. But it's also a format where you want to be affecting the board early in the game so that you can translate that into, a largish board that can turn the corner. It's not like the tap land on turn 2 will have you dead right away, but it means on future turns, if you didn't play a 2-drop, you might not have good double blocks. Or you might have one fewer creatures, and if you had one creature you played on turn 2, you could push lethal, right? It's that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that comes back to bite you. So yeah, I'm aiming to not have that many tap lands in my deck. Most of my mana bases are fixing their mana based on spells, and again, the Devotee cycle, they do that quite well. I don't like the Devotees just as cards. Like, if you don't need the fixing, I don't like many of them just to put in my deck. I think Mardu Devotee, which is the single white mana 1/2 that enters in the Scries one, this is the one I'm most willing to play because Mardu, or just like the white decks, just want cheap creatures, right? If this pecks in for a bit, or gets pumped later for a mass pump spell, that's fine. But like the Sultai one, for example, even 2/1 Death Touch, okay. It's not the most embarrassing thing in the world, but it doesn't stop dragons. It doesn't stop Mardu's mobilized tokens. Most of them are below the rate of the type of card I would want to play, or the type of creature I'd want to play in my deck if I don't need the fixing. I guess the way to put this is I don't just see the Devotees as good cards in the decks they go in, but if you want to count them as a source, if you need to count them as a source, they're good at doing that. I kind of see them as about the same level of a dual land, and maybe a little bit higher because, like I said, they're tempo positive, right? They don't cost you a tap land or anything. Then we've got Dragonstorm Globe, which is the 3-mana artifact that taps to add a mana of any color, and each dragon you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on. I really like this card. In my draft video I posted on the channel earlier this week, I said, I was already kind of up on it at that point of the format. I was like, yeah, I've been playing this card, and, if you want to make an Aether Drift comparison, there's Starting Column. I like this card maybe a little bit less than Starting Column, but now I've kind of flipped that. I like this card more than Starting Column. A 5-color mana rock that doesn't lock you into any colors, helps you cast, whatever color spell you need, that at some point adds power and toughness to the board is a really, really big deal. You'd be surprised how much a counter matters on some of these dragons. Like, there's a lot of 3/3 dragons running around. Making those 4/4s makes them into things that can block most of the spells before them, most of the, the 2, 3, and 4 drop. Or putting a counter on your dragon that's naturally a 4/4. A lot of the other dragons are 4/4s, so if you can have the 5/5, you rule the skies at that point. A little bit later, we're going to talk about the 5-color dragon deck that I think is pretty good and exists, and this card is a key part of that. So I've been speculating on dragons. Like if I see one, latish in pack one, pack one, pick 7, there's nothing else in the pack, I'm slamming it. I'm very happy to do that. And this is what I mean by I like my spells to fix my mana more than my lands generally. Because, well, yes, you are paying 3 mana to do not that much on turn 3, so it's tempo negative there. It will eventually become tempo positive once again once you can spend that mana over the course of 3 to 4 turns. And actually, often, there's actually some pretty good ways to spend that 1 mana on turn 3. So you can go, like, play the globe and hold up the black exhale, the -3/-3. You can cast that for 1 mana if you have a dragon in hand or on the battlefield. Or in red, there's like the red sorcery, deal 2 to something. So you don't even necessarily fall behind on board when you cast this card on turn 3. And in general, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, this isn't a format where you get run over very often. So most games, if you just cast this on turn 3 against, average Sultai or Temur, or even, honestly, even sometimes the Mardu decks, they don't come out swinging. And if this thing just sets you up, you're good to go for the rest of the game on all your mana. We also have Embermouth Sentinel, which is the 2 mana 2/1 that comes in. You can search your library for a basic land, put it on top. If you control a dragon, you put that on the battlefield instead. Don't like this card. It's emergency mode fixing, in my opinion. It's just, basically just a vanilla 2/1. It's a very low impact card in a format where a lot of the cards are very, very high impact. Basically, the 2/1 is just 2-0. It's just, and by the time you ramp, like say you do have a dragon, well, usually the dragons cost at least 5 mana. So if you play this on 6, well, you probably already have your mana, right? You probably are casting your cards, or you either that or you're dead. And the ramp just doesn't matter all that much at that point. So I would really avoid this card, but sometimes you just have to play it. Again, you just need the sources. By the way, one thing I'll shout out here is all these like, I don't like this fixture, I do like this fixer. That's me being picky. The priority should be casting your spells, even if it takes a few more tap lands than not, even if you have to play a Sentinel. If your source count isn't there for your splash or whatever cards you're trying to cast, that's a bigger problem than your fixing being a little bit finicky, being a little bit slow. So the pecking order is kind of like, ideally, you have not too many tap lands, 2 or 3 or 4 at max. The rest of your fixing is in your spells. And then the next ideal situation is like, okay, well, you have to play a lot of lands, but that's okay because you can still cast your spells. The worst thing is if you just don't have any fixing at all, right? Like, you want to avoid that. Like, there was that Jeskai deck we looked at a few minutes ago, and I would happily play an Embermouth Sentinel in that deck to make the mana better. Well, happily is a bit of a stretch, but I would play it because you just need the sources to cast your spells. Another quick thing that came to mind, actually, about the tap lands, I'm more willing to play more tap lands, something in the range of like 5, 6, 7, if I have a lot of cheap spells. Specifically cheap interaction, and there's the cycle of the exhales, the removal spells that common that care about dragons. So if I've got like 4 cheap removal spells, I feel okay playing more tap lands because you can go like on turn 2, kill their 2-drop if you need to. On turn 3, play a tap land, kill their 3-drop or 4-drop. Like, that's where you don't start to fall behind. If your deck is mostly expensive cards, though, or cards that don't interact early, that's where the tap lands are really going to bite you. Green has some pretty good fixers. Sagu Wildling is a card I like a lot. This is the 5-mana green Omen Dragon. It's a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. Enters the battlefield, gain 3 life. The Omen is sorcery, go get a basic land, put it into your hand. Another thing I've been asked this week is how many lands do you want to cut for cards like this? Can you go to 15? Can you go to 16? Generally, in most formats, when you have a card that's a single green mana, go and get a basic. I do like cutting my first land. I'm not opposed to it 100% in this format, but I've just found I want more mana sources rather than not in most of my decks. Most of my decks have good ways to spend their mana on turn 5, 6, 7 plus, right? I'm often, sometimes double spelling on turn 7, turn 8 still. So, if you really, really, really are like, I really don't know what the last cut of my deck is, and you have a Saga Wildling or a card that fetches out a basic land, sure, I don't think it's horrible, but I would also, in most decks, I think, that have a decently high curve, I would suggest just playing 17 lands plus additional mana sources. There's a lot of ways to draw cards in this format. It's one of those formats where you never really run out of cards unless you're playing an aggro deck. And between like Harmonize and good card draw and renew abilities, I just find I'm not really short on ways to spend my mana. Dragon Brood's Relic. I love this card. So this is 1 and a green for an artifact. You can tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. Then it has a very expensive and very colorful ability, 3 and Wooburg, 1 of each color. Sack this artifact, make a 4/4 dragon that has lifelink and flying, and when it enters, it deals 3 to any target. Activate that only as a sorcery. Of course, when it comes in, it gains life too, because the 3 damage will have lifelink. And this is, it kind of seems like a 5-color card, right? Because you need all 5 colors. But really, it's a 4-color card because this gives you the 5th color. You don't want to play this card if you can't make the dragon. It's just not very good if it's just like a artifact that sits there and turns one of your creatures into a Birds of Paradise. But in those decks that I talked about earlier, where you're like base blue-green, splashing red, splashing black, or, whatever, you're 4-color to some degree, this is a good card there. This is a really strong card. It often comes in, stabilizes the board, and becomes a giant threat. So yeah, thumbs up on this one. It's one I take pretty highly if I'm starting in green. And then some of my favorite fixing this set, I think some of these are very, very powerful. The cycle of the uncommon monuments. So these are all 2-mana artifacts that come in. You search your library for, in the case of the Mardu monument, a mountain, plains, or swamp. And they all have an activated ability to tap, sack, pay some mana, and make various tokens. So the Mardu one, for example, is 2 red, white, black. Tap, sack it, make 3 1/1 red warrior creature tokens. They gain menace and haste until end of turn. So the way you want to think about these, I think, is not quite Manafixers that do something later. They're creatures that draw you a land early, which is where you want the land early. It's kind of almost like a delayed enter the battlefield effect, or sorry, a preemptive enter the battlefield effect, right? And all of these rates, like if you had a spell that's like make 3 tokens that have menace and haste and draw a card, which is a land, at the point of the game you want the land early, like that's a really good rate, and they all kind of do that. So I think you should think of these as 3-color creatures that are only slightly overcosted on their, when you make the token, that draw you a land and they self-fix for themselves. So if I'm blue-green and I see the Temur monument, I don't necessarily need to be in Temur or have reasons to have red mana in my deck just yet. This is good enough is the way I would put it. The fact that it's a 5/5 that draws you a land early in the game, this is the reason in itself to take the card. And the reason I say it's self-splashing is because if you're just blue-green, you just put a mountain in your deck and, it kind of works itself out. And then, of course, this is another source for if you do pick up some actual cards that are, red mana or Temur mana or whatever they are. And I also want to make it clear that not all of these are created equally. I think the Mardu one and the Jeskai one are the best, and the Obzon one by far the worst. The Obzon one is like 4 mana, sack this to make an XX, where X is the greatest toughness among creatures you control. And sometimes it just doesn't do anything. Sometimes it makes like a 2/2. So that one I'm not so into. But Mardu Monument, currently, if you look on 17 lands, just to back this up a little bit, is the top winning uncommon, just straight up. And that's a surprise to me. I know I'm probably going to be a surprise to a lot of people. But it makes sense, I think, if you look at it of the lens of reverse enter the battlefield effect creature, that, the spell here, it's kind of like the red, white, gold card from Duskmourn. The, what's it called? Midnight Mayhem, right? The hasty 3/3 goblins with menace. And that was a really good spell, but this one fixes your mana and draws you a land. Jeskai Monument, also great. 4 mana, tap sack, make 2 1/1 birds. Then I like the Sultai one, which is 5 mana, tap sack, make 2 zombies. Temur one, 6 mana, tap sack, make a 5/5, and then the Obzon one. But all of these, even though there's definitely an order to them, I like them a lot. I will first pick Mardu Monument pretty happily. Jeskai one, too, it's not a card I'm sad about first picking. And yeah, I just think these cards are really good. I'm very happy to play them in all my decks. All right, with draft navigation and mana fixing aside, we can now finally talk about the clan, some specific cards. And clan ranking, let's just talk about that quickly. I think they're all pretty even, except Obzon. Obzon decks, not that you can't have a good one, but if you're just using commons and uncommons, the issue is they're a little bit too mid-rangey. Because the successful decks in this format are either killing you very fast, you're like a red-white based aggro deck that isn't splashing very much, and you're just looking to go smash, 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 or you're going like way over the top. You've got some of the better rares in the set, you're just hoping to find those, cast those, survive, kill your opponent's creatures so you don't die. And Obzon falls right in the middle, where I don't think it's very good at beating either of those strategies. I think the Obzon decks take a little bit too long to get going before the aggro decks can run them over, and they're very poorly positioned versus like a Temur or a Sultai deck that are just going way over the top, drawing a ton of cards. And so I think if you're Obzon, you're ending up there because you have a bunch of Obzon rares, or maybe a lot of copies of the Obzon Uncommon, the Dragon, Armament Dragon. I do like this card. This is the 6 mana Obzon, 3/4 flyer, comes in, you distribute 3+1/+1 counters among 3 target creatures, or any 1, 2, or 3 target creatures. Like, that card's pretty good. But yeah, just with the common uncommon cards, I don't think the deck is very strong. But yeah, all the other decks I'm fairly happy about playing. One thing that I think has given people a little bit of trouble, a little confusion, a little bit of, I don't really know how to build a deck in this format, is that in some formats with clans or guilds or whatever, there's very distinct, like, you should build your deck like this. There's a lot of handholds. If you just put all the cards that say this mechanic in them in your deck, your deck's going to end up, just pretty functional, pretty good. I don't think that's quite how it plays out in this format, because within each of the clans, they can be built more aggressively, more controlling. It really kind of depends on what cards you have, what your incentives are, and it's really up to you. Like, my example is, like, if you just put a bunch of cards that say Flurry in your deck, what does that mean? Like most of the themes are fairly light. Like, if you've got a bunch of Harmonize cards or a bunch of Renew cards in your deck, sure, that pushes you to be a little bit slower. But a lot of my Temur-based decks, they're not trying to get to the late game. They're trying to, like, play a high power threat, just kind of kill you. And they're using Harmonize as kind of like a mana sink. They're using Renew cards as that same mana sink, like a way to keep pushing damage. Or Jeskai in particular is pretty split, where sometimes you have, like, very tempo heavy Jeskai decks, and sometimes you're more on the control end of things. Mardu even, like, I think Mardu, most often is going to be an aggressive deck, but if you're closer to 3-color Mardu, where you've got, like, the Sonic Shriekers, the uncommon dragon, and maybe you're splashing a bunch, and your aggro decks don't really want to splash, they can't afford that many tap lands. If you're there, then yeah, you're not really playing Mardu aggro, you're playing Mardu mid-range, and you want different cards. So my advice is generally that there are 3 buckets, or I guess my theory, sort of so far, my working theory in the format is there's 3 general buckets of decks that you're trying to build in this format, and they roughly map onto, like, aggro, mid-range, and control. And so if you're an aggro deck, and mind you, I don't think there's very many aggro decks in the format that are good. I think you do really need to be, like, red-white aggro, because I think black-white, the black cards don't add that much to your white decks. Red-blue aggro, I haven't found to be very effective. I think if you're white-black aggro, it's mostly white cards. So the white base and the red base aggro decks, like, those work. And we're going to get into talking about those in a few minutes. But yeah, not that many good aggro decks. If you're a way over the top deck, as in, like, you're maybe 4 colors, 5 colors, you've got some of the better rares in the set. I'm thinking there's, like, the Temur 8-mana dragon that deals a bunch of damage to creatures your opponents control, or there's, like, the Temur 6-mana mythic enchantment that deals 3 to everything and landfall and make a dragon. If you've got some of these good rares, or your deck's just filled with a bunch of card draw and removal, that's one style of deck where you're just like, okay, let's survive. Let's just, kill your opponent's stuff, try not to die, cast my big spell, and oops, I win. But there are mid-range decks in the middle that are successful. Unlike Obzon, which I don't think are very successful. I find that, like, Temur mid-range, where you're, like, base blue-green, or maybe even, like, Sultai or Jeskai mid-range, where basically the idea is you're trying to play efficiently costed creatures early, and set up for some sort of tempo win, right? You're not trying to play the late game. If you don't have those top-end good rares I was talking about, you can't really play the late game, because some people will have those rares and they'll just crush you. So I'm thinking these mid-range decks that have, 4 power creatures, and they've got bounce spells, and they've got combat tricks. Basically, you're trying to play decent creatures early and leverage high power creatures, just so you can go, like, I hit you a few times and you die. That's what I found is kind of effective when you don't end up with a bunch of good rares. So yeah, this is also, this is a little bit rambly, so I apologize for that. But this is all to say that your deck is very much not defined by your clan, or your deck strategy is not defined by your clan. It's defined much more by what kind of cards do you have. Do you have all the really good 2-drops? Okay, well, if you've got a bunch of the 1/2 that endures 1 in whites, and Shock Brigade, which is the 1/3 menace mobilize 1, great. You can be a red-white aggro deck. If you don't have those good 2s, you can't be a good aggro deck. Do you have good rares that you're building towards, or maybe really good uncommons that that can kind of stand in for good rares? Do you have 3 or 4 of those? Great, you can play that control-y, just survive, stay alive, killer stuff, cast my awesome cards. But if you're not there, You need some plan so you don't end up in dirtily Abzan mid-range. And you know, I'm saying using Abzan as an example, but I can easily see somebody ending up in like Temur mid-range with, you know, they don't really have a plan to end the game. They're just like, well, I'll cast some kind of big things and maybe that'll get there. If you're Temur mid-range or some sort of green mid-range, you need your plan to be set up a clock of high-powered green creatures, get them through somehow. Either removal, combat tricks, bounce spells, all that kind of stuff. All right, let's talk about some cards. Let's talk about the clans. I'm going to be a little bit loose with this. I'm not going to be like talking about all 5 clans and here's what Jeskai wants, here's what Temur wants, because like I said, I think it's not as strict as that. So I'm more just going to be talking about groupings of cards, talking about the 2-color enemy pairs that we've been talking about, what adding an additional color to your deck might give you. Let's start with blue-green. This is the most common base that I have been in. I've been drafting a lot of blue-green, partially because I think it's quite strong, partially because it's been pretty open. A card I've talked about a lot already, or mentioned a lot, I should say, is Kishla Skimmer, the blue-green 2/2 flyer that whenever a card leaves your graveyard during your turn, draw a card. This triggers only once each turn. Really strong card, just 2-mana 2/2 flyer. Whenever you have an ability on your 2-mana 2/2 flyers, that usually means it's a pretty good card. And this just drawing you a card every turn when you cast a Harmonize card or a Renew ability, or there's just like a bunch of cards that pull cards from your graveyard or exile a card from your graveyard. Really just a premium uncommon. Very happy to first pick this one. Some commons that I like in the blue-green base, Sibsig Appraiser. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/1. When it enters, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, the other into your graveyard. This card is just excellent. I have this as the top common, as does 17 lands. A 3-mana 2/1. Not a great body, but you can forgive a understated body when it draws you a card, especially when it gives you some selection on that card, and when sometimes the other card you put in the graveyard is a Harmonize or a Renew card. So just a fantastic card. It really does everything you want in basically all the blue decks. Similarly, I really like Einok Wayfarers. This is 1 and a green for a 1/1. When it enters, you mill 3 cards. You can put a land from among those into your hand. If you don't, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I treat this as a top green common. I think just like the Appraiser, kind of just does everything you want. Draws you a card, fills the graveyard, triggers your Kishla Skimmer or anything that cares about leaving the graveyard. We've got the green and blue Exhales, and I've kind of talked about these cards throughout the episode so far, but I just want to call out the cycle of Exhales. Piercing Exhale in green, Dispelling Exhale in blue, that's the counter spell. Piercing Exhale is the bite spell. These are all really, really strong. I think the worst one is the white one. That's the one that deals 5 damage to an attacker or a blocker. Not because it's a poor effect, but because most of my white-based decks are aggro decks. And of course, you don't really want a removal spell that doesn't get a blocker out of the way in your aggro decks as much as you would in like a control deck. I think it's a powerful control card. And the Bestow or Behold a Dragon thing on that card is gain 2 life, which is also very good for a control deck, not as good for an aggro deck. So just a quick thought on the Exhales. I take these highly. I treat these all as top commons. Especially the blue one is a good one to call out. This is the 2-mana counter unless they pay 2, but if you have a dragon, counter unless they pay 4. The counter spells are really good in this format. And there's 3 of them that exist. There's this one. There's one uncommon we're going to talk about. And there's like the top or bottom spell is modal. It's negate as one of the modes. And because there's so many awesome 5, 6, 7 mana cards, counter spells are just great. Very happy to play a few Dispelling Exhales, especially if I have dragons. I would say actually mostly if I have dragons. This is the one that's got the biggest delta between when you have a dragon or a bunch of dragons in your deck and you don't. Because counter unless they pay 4, that's almost hard counter spell. There's not a lot of spots where they're going to cast a relevant spell. They're like, yep, I'd like that countered, and counter unless they pay 4 doesn't pay for it. So really like this card when you have a lot of dragons. Less so when you don't have a lot of dragons. And then a lot of dragons is like 4 or 5, I would say. Another counterspell I like a lot, Spectral Denial, is X and a blue for an instant at uncommon. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each power 4 or greater creature you control, and you counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So very similar to everything I just said about the Dispelling Exhale, although you can get a really, really awesome mana advantage with this card if you have a few 4-power creatures lying around. Sometimes just single blue mana, counter their 5-drop or something like that. That's really strong. I like Veteran Ice Climber a fair bit. This is the 1 in a blue 1/3 vigilance creature that can't be blocked, and when this attacks, up to 1 target player mills cards equal to this creature's power. So this is obviously an enabler for your Harmonize cards, and your renew cards. If you put some counters on this thing, can really get out of hand. You can like turbo mill yourself, or sometimes your opponent's also playing self mill and they've flown a little bit too close to the sun, and you just go, okay, well, I'm going to make my Ice Climber a 4-power creature, and you have 2 turns to answer this, or else you just lose because I deck you. So yeah, pretty strong card for this blue-green shell. Riverwalk technique. This is the top or bottom removal spell I talked about in blue a second ago. So yeah, 4-mana instant, top or bottom, a non-land permanent. And then the other mode is counter target non-creature spell, which is great. There's the cycle of really strong sagas at rare, also the sieges at rare are cards you want to counter. There's some, there's the cycle of mythic spells for each clan that are all excellent. So negate is a strong effect in this format. I wouldn't just play 4-mana negate, of course, but tacked onto a top or bottom interaction spell, totally a card I'm happy to play. The uncommon blue-green dragon's pretty strong. Whirlwind Strongbrood, 5-mana, 4/3 flying flash. That says you can cast sorcery spells and dragons as though those had flash. And Dynamic Soar is the omen to an green to put 3+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Pretty flexible card. Sometimes you just go to town and you go, all right, put 3 counters on my Kishla Skimmer or on that Veteran Ice Climber, the 1/3 unblockable. But most of the time you're just like flashing this in, having a threat your opponent didn't expect, then you can start to play at instant speed. So yeah, just a card I like quite a bit. Plays well with all the counters and stuff. A lot of the cards that I've talked about so far are good in either like the controlling blue-green, draw a bunch of cards, go find my good rare or awesome uncommons, just win with that kind of deck. But 2 uncommons I want to call out that aren't as good in those decks, but are very, very good if you're the more mid-rangey blue-green tempo-y decks, are Rennie's Rebuff, 1 in a blue sorcery, return target creature to its owner's hand, harmonize for 6 mana, and Synchronized Charge, 1 in a green sorcery, distribute 2+1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures you control. Creatures you control with counters on them gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. Harmonize for 5 mana. Yeah, just 2 really good effects. Kind of funny enough, callbacks to Innistrad cards, both OG Innistrad. This is Silent Departure and Travel Preparation for folks that know those cards. But yeah, the rebuff just being like, bouncing a 5/5 token sometimes, or just bouncing any big dummy that your opponent has, doing that again next turn. The opponent goes like, oh, I don't really want to cast my 5-mana dummy again. Even if it's like a big dragon, some of them don't have like awesome enter the battlefield effects or something. It's like, okay, well, they just get to bounce that again. So yeah, really strong card for these tempo decks. I don't hate this card in my slower decks too. Just the double bounce spell can be okay. Generally the idea is bounce spells are worse in control decks because you're going down a card and you're playing a long game, so it's just card disadvantage. But with these blue decks, I find you just don't run out of cards, so I don't mind a card that is just purely buying me tempo. And then, yeah, Synchronized Charge, it's a kind of an obvious card. Just put counters on your cards, push damage, makes a lot of sense. Another card I like in these more tempo-y blue-green decks is Sarkhan's Resolve. 1 in a green instant, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, or you destroy target creature with flying, so just a pretty good versatile trick. And let's talk some of the more powerful cards you can pick up, some of the 3-color cards. And we're going to talk about the Temur and the Sultai cards at the same time. Often when I'm drafting blue-green, I'm just on the lookout for, okay, well, are there Temur cards coming to me, or are there Sultai cards coming to me? Maybe some of both, and I play both. But getting into 3-color Temur and 3-color Sultai is a pretty similar process to me. Like, these decks overlap a lot in my mind, especially because they both offer you rares that say, okay, well, I'm no longer a mid-range deck that's trying to end the game with tempo, bounce spells, combat tricks. I'm now just trying to get to the late game, cast these cards, and try to win. And let's just talk about some of those cards. So, an uncommon that is phenomenal. This one's just been going up and up and up for me. I currently have it, I think, as like a top 5 uncommon. Heretick Guardian. This is 3 and Temur, so 6 mana for a 6/5 flying vigilance trample. This creature has hexproof if it hasn't dealt damage yet. And what you see is what you get, but what you get is phenomenal. Comes down, deals them a bunch of damage, blocks really well. He's a dragon that just has a bunch of inherent upside in this set. So yeah, awesome uncommon. I think this is good enough to say, like, okay, I'm just going to try to survive and win with this thing. Maybe protect it with like a snakeskin veil. Maybe have some counterspell backup, so when I do deal damage, I can protect it. It really does stabilize the game in a lot of ways when it comes down. So yeah, if you pick up some of these, or if you start with them, I think you can start building towards that removal, card draw, late game kind of plan in mind. But some cards that definitely say that. Some of the most busted rares in the set. 2 Temur Mythics. Ureni, the Song Unending. 8 mana, 5 in Temur for a 10/10 pro-black, pro-white. When it enters, it deals X damage, divided as you choose among any number of creatures and or planeswalkers an opponent controls, where X is the number of lands you control. So comes in, instantly stabilizes you, and is basically unkillable. Like, you need blue interaction to kill this, because obviously protection from black or white, but red and green can't often kill it. They're like, the fight spells generally don't 10-10. There's not a lot of 10-10s running around, so what's gonna bite it? Yeah, there's not like, you need like 2 deal 5s. I guess 2 copies of the Narset's, whatever it is, the 5 mana deal 5, then you get a 3 mana rebate. I guess if you had 2 of those and 7 mana, it would get the job done. But it's basically unkillable. So yeah, this is like quintessential, just survive and you'll win. Dragonback Assault, Temur enchantment at Mythic, comes in, deals 3 to everything. Landfall, make a 4/4 dragon. Same story here, phenomenal. Roar of Endless Song. Temur gets a lot of really good rares. This is the Temur Saga, 5 mana saga. Make 2 elephants for the first 2 chapters, then double the power and toughness of all of your creatures until end of turn. Busto. For Sultai cards, we've got Death Begets Life. Sultai Mythic, 8 mana. Destroy all creatures and enchantments. You draw a card for each permanent destroyed this way. Busto. Got some more very good rares. Jeskai Dragonclaw as a 4 mana 4/4. Vigilance Trample, Ward 1. When you cast a creature and a non-creature spell, at the beginning of combat, you get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on Jeskai and draw a card. Temur Battlecrier, 3 mana 4/3. During your turn, spells cost 1 less for each 4-power creature you control. I'm going to say it again. Temur gets a lot of really, really good rares. Sultai also gets some fairly good rares. For the sake of time, not going to read all these ones out, but Sultai's Saga is pretty good. There's also the Sultai 3/3 flash creature that like counters something when it comes in, or surveils, or destroys an enchantment. That card's pretty solid. I'm going to talk about some of the 2-brid cards here. So each clan has 1 at common and 1 at uncommon. And the uncommons for Sultai and Temur are both really strong. Dragonclaw Strike is the Temur one, so it's 2 hybrid green, 2 hybrid blue, 2 hybrid red. Double the power and toughness of target creature you control. It fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. You can really set up some nice combo kills with this in the more like tempo-focused blue-green base. It's just like 1 pump spell on a 5/5, or like on a dragon. You know, imagine you had the uncommon Temur dragon, where you double its power and toughness. It's now a 12 power creature, hexproof, trample. Very easy to win the game from there. And then we've got Rakshasa's Bargain. So this is the Sultai 2-brid card on uncommon. Instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, rest in the graveyard. Awesome draw spell. I mentioned with all the blue and green commons that like take a card or draw a card and put stuff in the grave. Well, this does that, but turbocharge, right? Draw 2 cards, sometimes put a harmonized card and a renew card in the grave. I've already done that already in the format where I took 2 cards I wanted, like a land and a removal spell, then binned 2 things in the graveyard that were used later. And I promise, I'm not just talking about like every single card in these colors just because I want to talk about them. I'm really calling out cards that are strong, and there just happens to be a lot of cards that are strong. So I'm kind of just reading out cards here, but I think it's with a purpose. I think it's like, yeah, these cards you should keep an eye out for, because some of these that I mentioned, I'm still getting pretty late. And then 2 cards that I've come up on quite a bit in the past 2 days are the common 2-brid cards, both the Sultai one and the Temur one. Temur Tawnyback is obviously the Temur one. This is green 2-brid, blue 2-brid, red 2-brid for a 4/3. When it enters, draw a card, then discard a card. This is a really nice thing if you're in that Temur mid-range deck and you can cast this on turn 3, get a 4-power creature down, often hits once or twice, loots you, puts a spell in the yard. So just, I think a very flexible card. And that's something I should mention, actually, for all these cards. They're super flexible, right? Because they go in, for this one, for example, goes in a blue-red base deck, goes in a green-red base deck. If your mana base is kind of funky, maybe it's a 5-mana green card, mono green card. Not ideal, but sometimes you have like a 5-color deck or a 4-color deck and you just don't have all your colors. You can cast them at a bit of a more expensive than you'd like rate. So yeah, I see these as pretty strong and pretty flexible cards in the draft. Then looking at the Sultai one, Grimag Nightwatch. I wasn't sold on this one for a while, but the more I played it, and honestly the more I played against it, the more I was sold on it. So this is black 2-brid, green 2-brid, blue 2-brid for a 3/3. When it enters, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You can put one of those cards back on top, the rest in the graveyard. It's kind of the same deal where, it doesn't draw you a card on its effect, but if you can put a harmonized card in the graveyard or something you care about in the graveyard, and then set up your next draw step for a good spell, it does virtually draw you a card and sets up your next draw. And it's, 3 mana 3/3. That's a good rate. Even on 4, this isn't the worst. Like a 4 mana 3/3 do this effect. So yeah, just wanted to call this out. It's one I was pretty much ignoring. But I do play quite often now. Okay, so let's move on to the Mardu decks. And when you're Mardu, I think you're most often going to want to be base red whites, and sometimes splashing for some black cards. I found that the black cards don't pressure all that well. Like, if you just go through the list of uncommon and common black creatures, they just either don't attack very well or are like 1-powered 3-drops. It just isn't as quick of a clock as you. And I think true to the archetype description that you'll find WotC provided, I think your main idea to deal with this deck is going wide. You're looking to deal early chip damage with your 1s and 2s when you can. You're looking for creatures that create multiple bodies. And then you're looking to finish off the game with some sort of go wide effect. And there's not actually a ton of go wide effects in this format. And I think they all live at uncommon. Frontline Rush is the red-white instant, and it's a split card. Either make 2 goblins, or target creature you control gets +X/+X until end turn, or X number of creatures you control. Duty Beyond Death is a 2-mana instant. As an initial cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end turn, and you put a +1/+1 counter on each of your creatures. War Effort is a 4-mana enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+0. Then whenever you attack, you make a tapped attacking 1/1 warrior token that you sack at the beginning of your next end step. So Frontline Rush is just a pretty good card. Like, I think you can just kind of play this in any deck. To play a Duty Beyond Death and War Effort comfortably, I think you really have to be like, yes, I am going wide. Because if you ever end up in a spot where you're like, I've played a 2-drop that, isn't a token maker into a 3-drop that isn't a token maker or a mobilize card, your opponent kills one of those, you've got a War Effort or a Duty Beyond Death in your hand, and you're just like, you want to scoop. You're just like, this card does nothing here. So to comfortably play these cards, you really have to have, I would say, like 7-8 token makers. Mobilized creatures do count as well, I would say. But these aren't just, you can't just throw these into any deck and call it a go wide deck. You have to actually be token focused. Another go wide payoff, sort of in some ways, is Salt Road Pack Beast. This is the 6-mana 4/3. When it enters, you draw a card. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control. Kind of the same thing as the cards I just mentioned, where you really do want to be heavy tokens, going wide. It's much more acceptable to have this card in your deck. The floor is much higher than those other ones. I had really, really high hopes for this card. Like, I was thinking this might be a top common, and it's still a pretty good common, and it's top common for these decks. But it is still a card that you need to keep the creature count high. You really would like to have a lot of tokens. A card that's impressed me is Rebellious Strike. This is the 2-mana instant. Target creature gets +3/+0 till on a turn you draw a card. So it just really helps you trade up with a bunch of stuff. Just pushes a little more damage on an unblocked creature. Just pretty versatile. I wouldn't be sad actually playing like 2 copies of this even. I think this trick, it doesn't help you win combats, but it helps your mobilized creatures actually kill something. Makes your opponent feel very silly for blocking with their good dragon or whatever. So yeah, I think this is a card that honestly might even be a higher priority than Duty Beyond Death or War Effort. I mean, I guess higher priority is not the way to put it, because this goes around pretty late. You don't need to take it very highly. But in your average deck that isn't super token heavy, you're happier to play Rebellious Strike than you are Duty Beyond Death. Then let's look at the cheap creatures you're happy to play in these decks, because honestly, there's not a ton of them. There's actually a fairly small band of creatures that I'm happy about playing my red-white aggro deck. So you're looking for Mardu Devotee, like I mentioned before, especially if you are splashing. Another good 1-drop is Descendant of Storms, single white mana for a 2/1. When it attacks, you can pay 2. If you do, it endures 1. Have I even talked about endure this entire episode? I don't think so. When you endure, you put a counter on the creature, or you make a 1/1 token, or whatever the number is. I'm sure most people know that, but it's just kind of funny. Yeah, just like, I'm not Abzon pilled, as you can tell. The 2-drops you're looking for. Bearer of Glory, 2 mana, 2/1 in white that has first strike on your turn. You can pay 5 mana to give all your creatures +1/+1 till on a turn. I guess this is another go wide payoff. So, double duty as a payoff on an enabler. Fortress Kingguard, this is the 2 mana 1/2 that endures 1. Okay, I talked about this card, so I have talked about endure. Never mind. Shock Brigade. I love Shock Brigade. This is like the red 2-drop, or like the 2-drop you want. I think this is the best aggressive 2-drop of common. This is the 2 mana 1/3 Menace Mobilize 1. Getting 2 creatures in front of this is not that easy, and if they do that, you can foil it with Rebellious Strike, for example, give it +3. Multiple copies of this play very, very well together. Moving to some uncommon 2-drops to like, Shocking Sharpshooter is the 2 mana 1/3 reach. Whenever a creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. Sunset Strike Master is the 2 mana 3/1 in red, taps to add a red mana. You can also tap sack it, pay 3 mana to deal 6 to a flyer. Just a pretty solid card. And then the common 2-brid, Reigning Victor. So this is red 2-brid, white 2-brid, black 2-brid, 3 mana 3/3, mobilize 1. When it enters, target creature you control gets +1/+0, gains indestructible until end of turn. Yeah, perfectly good playable. I like this card. The red-white dragon is just excellent. This is Twin Maw Stormbrood, 6 mana, 5/4 flying. When it enters, you gain 5. The omen side is 1 in a red, deal 5 to a creature without flying. And this card is good in your aggro decks, of course. I mean, it's just like a very flexible card, but it's a card I like in my control decks a lot too. One of the best cards to take early because, I'll splash this card in my Temur decks. A lot of time I'll sneak a white source or 2 in there. And then I do want to cover the cases where you do want to add black mana to your deck. And I think it's not for a lot of cards, honestly, mostly for rares. So the one uncommon that I think you're going to be happy adding black mana to your deck, tap lands, picking up some more Mardu devotees, is Sonic Shrieker. This is the Mardu Dragon. I've already read this one out, so won't bother with it. We also have Zurgo, Thunder's Decree, 3 mana, 2/4, mobilize 2, which says your warrior tokens can't be sacrificed on your end step, so you get to keep around your mobilized cards. We've also got Inevitable Defeat, really awesome removal spell. 1 and Mardu, instant, can't be countered. Exile target online permanent. Its controller loses 3 life. You gain 3 life. And I think that's kind of it. We've got the chicken jockey, Mardu Siegebreaker, 1 Mardu mana, 4/4 Death Touch haste. When it enters, exile up to 1 target creature you control until this leaves. And whenever this creature attacks, you make a copy of that creature tapped and attacking. It's a solid card. You want this to pair with enter the battlefield effect creatures, but not one of the better black cards. But I think kind of like just passes the bar for I'll add some black mana to my deck for this card. So yeah, I think my really big picture tips for red-white are keep it lean, keep it to 2 colors if you can, make sure you're picky about the 2 drops, and make sure you are truly going wide if you're playing War Effort or Duty Beyond Death. Otherwise, you're going to be very sad, and they're just going to rot in your hand a little too long. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Jeskai, and I'm not going to go too deep on all the commons and uncommons. I'm just going to kind of give some thoughts on what Jeskai looks like. So Jeskai is the one that's the most split. I think half the time you're going to be a very aggressive deck, half the time you're going to be a more controlling deck. The times you are an aggressive deck are often when you start in a red-white deck, and you either find red-white's not as open as you need it to be, so you add a 3rd color, or you just see some very powerful blue cards and you're like, okay, those are worth adding blue mana to my deck for. And the other half of the time, when you're the controlling deck, that's when you have some of the higher rarity cards. Notably, Jeskai Revelation, I think, is just the best card in the set. So this is 4 blue, red, white for an instant at Mythic. Return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. By the way, go grab some popcorn, grab a sandwich. This one's going to take a while. So return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. That's one thing. Jeskai Revelation deals 4 damage to any target. Create 2 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess. Draw 2 cards. You gain 4 life. It's just it just keeps going on and on and on. It just does so much. And there's a few cards that can recur this. There's the Jeskai common 2-brid card, puts a spell from your graveyard into your top of your library. There's Kishla Trawlers, I think it's called, which is the blue uncommon. It's like a 3 mana 3/2 that you can exile a creature card from your graveyard when it comes in to return a spell from your graveyard to your hand. So if casting it once wasn't enough, you can cast it multiple times, and I think it's worth including those kind of cards in your deck if you do have Jeskai Revelation. But yeah, just an absolutely absurd card. The Mythic Dragon, Shiko, is also really good. Just a big dragon that casts a spell out of your grave. For those watching along on YouTube with the visuals here, I've also got a bunch of other 3-color cards that I just I've ordered them in rough order of how much I like them. So just use that as a rough guide. I also want to call out River Wheel Sweep. This is the uncommon Jeskai 2-brid card. Says tap a target creature, put 3 stun counters on it, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. Oh, and it's a sorcery, by the way. Really great card. We've seen cards like this before. Just put 3 stun counters on something. And those cards are very good, but as is true for many Magic cards, when you tack on draw a card, it changes how good the card is. And I think this card is quite good and quite flexible in the draft, of course. I haven't found blue-red tempo to really be a good base for this Jeskai deck. I just don't think the blue cards do a very good job of pressuring. That's why I think the aggressive versions of these decks really do want to be red-white. I think you could have a controlling deck with red and blue spells. That totally works. If your base is red-blue for controlling cards, like removal spells, card draw, counter spells. I could also see a blue-white base, because then you get the 2 exhales, like the blue counter spell exhale, and the white deal 5 to an attacker or blocker exhale. Having those as cheap cards you can cast early, like that probably creates a pretty good base for Jeskai control deck. But yeah, I like Jeskai. I think it's pretty versatile, pretty flexible. This is the deck that by far is the one that you can't just put Jeskai cards in your deck and just be like, yep, I'm just gonna be some Jeskai deck with some powerful cards. I guess unless it's Jeskai Revelation, because that card just does it all. But you really have to say, am I an aggro deck or am I control deck? Make that differentiation and draft different cards accordingly. And then in lieu of talking about Abzan, because I think at this point in the format, honestly, my recommendation would be stay away from Abzan until the format adjusts a little bit. I think Abzan is like the outlier deck where on week 3 of the format, it's probably going to be something good to talk about. There's something there. I don't think it's like lost without a cause. I think there is something to be said about it. But this episode's already going a little bit long, and I do really want to talk about 5-color dragons, which I think is a real deck. So if I didn't start this episode talking about draft navigation, talking about mana, one of the big picture ideas that I would have started with is dragons are good in this set. They did a very good job of the dragon themed set, making you want to actually draft and put dragons in your deck. Most of them are just pretty strong, and there's also a lot of reasons to just want dragons. Mainly the exhales, right? Making those common removal spells a little bit better. 2, it's a fairly late game dominated format, so just having big flying dragons is just a good thing. 3, the uncommon Dragonstorms, the enchantments that you can pick up when you cast a dragon and they all have an enter the battlefield effect, are all pretty good. And some of them actually have been very surprising. Like I thought maybe like 1 or 2 of these would be pretty good, but almost all of them I think are playable in this 5-color dragon deck. So the blue and the white one, Roiling Dragonstorm, which is the 2-mana enchantment, comes in, draw 2, then discard 1, then has the text you can pick it up when a dragon enters. And the white one, Teeming Dragonstorm, 4 mana, make 2/2/2 tokens, and the Dragonstorm text. I'm just gonna call it the Dragonstorm text from now on. These are the most generically good ones. Both of their effects are just pretty solid. The white one maybe a little bit more than the blue one, but the blue one in almost any blue deck if you have a dragon or 2, like maybe a pitch or renew card or something. Just good effects. The one that really surprised me is Encroaching Dragonstorm. This is the green one that comes in and searches 2 basic lands out, puts them on the battlefield. In most formats, this would just be a little bit too slow, a little bit too, what are you doing with 6 mana? But it happens to be the case that in this format, you have a lot of stuff to do with your mana, just a ton. Between card draw, harmonize, all the things I've already talked about. So the double ramp spell is actually pretty relevant, and the thinning of your deck after you cast it a few times, that's also really relevant. So this one, I actually think is just like a solid green card in decks that need the fixing. But if you do have 3 or 4 dragons, it becomes, even better than that. It becomes a true deck thinner. So that's the next level of generically good. The other 2 are a bit dicier. The red one's a 5 mana, exile the top card of your library until you hit a non-land. You get to cast that card, and if you don't want to cast it, you can put it into your hand, so you don't have to like cast a counter spell or something. And so this is sort of like a weird card draw spell, and it's really good if you can play it and then hit a dragon immediately off of it, pick it up right away. But if you're just like casting this on 5 and you're not sure what you're gonna hit, sometimes you hit something that's like not close to worth 5 mana. So it has a really high ceiling. If you just keep going, cast Dragonstorm, cast Dragonstorm, cast Dragonstorm, when you're already stable, yeah, you're gonna take over the game. But unlike the blue, white, or green ones, I think just a little bit less generically good. And then there's the black one, Corroding Dragonstorm, 2 mana, drain 2. Your opponent loses 2, you gain 2, and you surveil 2. Yeah, I haven't liked this one as much, but I think just fine. If you are truly this 5-color dragon deck, it's a playable one. I would count it as playable, but never really prioritize it. So yeah, all these Dragonstorms, just good cards to varying degrees. And then one last thing to call out here for this 5-color dragon deck, a card that I know is not on many people's radar, but I actually think is one of the best uncommons. Dragonstorm Forecaster. Single blue mana for an 0/3, pay 2, tap it, search your library for a Dragonstorm Globe, which is that 3 mana rock, or a Boulder Bone Dragon, which is a 5 mana 3/3 flying vigilance creature. When this attacks, surveil 1. I've been playing these cards a lot, this package, and I think it's a really strong package. I don't think you want to play the Forecaster unless you have both the Globe and the Dragon, but just imagine this, right? You play the Dragonstorm Forecaster on 1, you go search out the Globe, play the Globe on 3, then on turn 4, you can tap the Globe and something else, another land, to go get the Dragon, play a different spell that turn. The Dragon comes in as a 4/4 Vigilant Flyer, so Sarah Angel that surveils when it attacks. Boulderborn Dragon looks pretty darn bad, but just getting 1 counter on it turns it from a bad card to a good card. And if you're drawing it for free, which, you know, this Dragonstorm Forecaster draws you 2 cards over the course of a few turns, maybe even more if you have like 2 globes in your deck. That all ties together to be a pretty good effect, and you definitely want Dragonstorm globes. I didn't call that out at first, but Dragonstorm globe is another big part of this deck where you want to play a globe on 3 almost every game, so you get that mana advantage, you can cast your dragons. So yeah, the formula here, I think it's pretty straightforward. There's nothing like funny or too tricksy going on, other than all these Dragonstorms are pretty good, and Forecaster is great, kind of sneakily good. But yeah, this is a deck that I've trophied with twice already. I think it's pretty good. I imagine that once the format settles a little bit, and you don't get the busted dragons as often, it's going to be a little bit less good. Also, this is, you know, I'm sure once people catch wind of this, people are going to be like, oh, I really want to draft that deck. Might be kind of hard to get into, but, you know, try to get into it. I hope that in the early days of the draft, you're still able to. Because, yeah, it's really fun. And like I said, I do think it's actually a legitimately good deck. That is going to do it. Everybody, thank you so much on this pretty long episode, jam-packed episode. We'll be back next week, of course, to dive further in this format. Hope you enjoyed. If you made it this far, do like, subscribe, comment on the YouTube, all that good stuff. Check out the Patreon if you're interested in all that stuff. And thanks for watching. We'll see you later, everybody.